Sandwiched between the metro areas of both New York City and Philadelphia, New Jersey is not often considered a destination in and of itself. Either you live here, maybe you're visiting AC or the shore. However, if you stumble into most any deli worth its cheese the morning after a rough night out, you could be treated to a divine combination of a proper New York bagel, farm fresh eggs, and yellow American cheese. But it won't be complete without one more ingredient, an otherwise innocuous processed meat that is simultaneously smoky, sweet, and a kind of divine that seems to transcend the mere delicious. Some describe it as somewhere between Canadian bacon and regular normal proper bacon, but with more chew, more sweet, and sunshine and happiness. Taylor pork roll, or as it is just as commonly known, Taylor ham. Now, for those of you who are uninitiated, there are conflicting opinions on which name is the correct one. In fact, here in the Garden State, opinions about the perennial debate are about as divisive as such things can get, ranging from tongue-in-cheek friendly banter to ending more relationships than Monopoly, which is also based in New Jersey. But who's correct? Is it Taylor ham or Taylor pork roll? Well, as much of a cop-out as this is, both are correct. Sort of. This is the story of Taylor ham, aka Taylor pork roll, aka John Taylor's gift to humanity. Welcome to Words and Coffee, where we discuss interesting history about the Garden State and enjoy a cup of small batch roasted goodness. Today's coffee is bourbon chocolate chip from Monkey Cult Coffee Company, and the history is the history of Taylor ham / Taylor pork roll. Let's get to it. There is a legend from the Revolutionary War that a local pig farmer had need to cull his herd, but he lacked the proper sausage casings. Instead, he improvised by packing the shredded pork into a small canvas bag after applying generous amounts of salt, spice, and smoke. The problem was, no one wanted to buy it because it didn't look like sausage. His warehouse was soon full of this rolled pork. That was until after the Battle of Trenton. General George Washington was in a bit of a bind. Now, this wasn't just because he had set the tempo of the American military for years to come by killing a bunch of Germans on Christmas, but now he had to winter his entire force on the beachhead he had just established in enemy-controlled territory, and his soldiers were hungry. Now stuck in the New Jersey winter, which is awful no matter what century it is, they turned, in their hour of need, to this entrepreneur and his novel meat delivery system. Smoky and salty like ham, but rolled into a convenient package that could be sliced while still in the bag. The soldiers were hooked. And it was said that General George Washington himself invited this man into his tent, a man named Taylor. And the future man on the $1 bill was heard to utter in that moment, "Should we call it Taylor's ham or Taylor's pork roll?" Mr. Taylor considered this, and thought, and thought. And after a long moment, he was heard to say, "I don't care, as long as you cut it into a Pac-Man. Star cut is the way of sin." All right, so none of that is true. Well, not literally, but we'll get to that. First off, it wasn't the Revolutionary War, but the Civil War. Back during the whole brother versus brother, Grays versus Blues, and before the Battle of Manasses was something that happened during Pride Month, we had a lot of fighting men who needed to be fed on the march. Processed and preserved meat that could travel well was going through a bit of a boom. Enter John Taylor. Born in 1836, he went into the grocery business at the age of 17. He turned out to have a passion for food, and where most teenagers experimented with drugs or sex, our boy John was experimenting with pork. And in 1860, he first came up with what would become his gift to humanity. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before he would become like a god amongst us, John lived for many years as a simple man. In 1860, he married Catherine Rowley, who would bear him 2 sons. At the age of 24, he started his own wholesale grocery business, which was comfy and profitable work, but it wasn't enough for our boy John. He went on to serve in the Trenton City Council and was later elected to the state Senate, representing Mercer County, as that rarest of things, a New Jersey Republican. So, by the age of 47, he ran a business, started a family, and worked in government. That's a respectable track record by any metric. But it wasn't until 1888 that he'd make history. Founded in the city of Trenton, he unveiled his signature product. Now, some of you right now may be wondering if there is some Mandela effect at work here, and the answer is not this time. Yes, it was originally Taylor ham, and for years it stayed that way. People went nuts for it, and our boy John was getting some much deserved recognition. It was so successful, and it soon inspired competition because this is America, and capitalism loves that sort of thing. But our boy John wasn't daunted. He met this challenge in stride, even though the man trying to eat his market share was George Washington. Okay, not that George Washington, but George Washington Case of the Case Pork Company. He unveiled a competing pork roll product with his own proprietary herbs and spices, also headquartered in the city of Trenton, same as Taylor. Thus, the original battle between Taylor ham versus pork roll was born in, of all places, Trenton. This is another one of those little things that I love about history, finding the facts behind the legend and seeing how they get telephone gamed and contorted into a wholly made up story. Someone, at some point, saw the name George Washington, noted that the product was used to feed soldiers, and naturally assumed that meant the original Washington. Mix in a figurative battle taking place in Trenton, and the result is some goofy story about General George Washington feeding his troops with Taylor ham after telling the Hessians to go pound sand. I just love it. In 1906, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. This was one of those things done in response to shady Victorian era practices like mixing gypsum in with flour to make cheaper bread, and like the worst parts of the meatpacking industry. This would later evolve into the modern day FDA. Among other things, it legally defined ham as a particular cut of a particular animal and nothing else except for maybe salt and smoke. And John Taylor's prepared ham, despite being unimpeachable in its flavor and decadence, was nonetheless in violation of this bureaucratic slap in the face of nature and God. Taylor appealed this ruling in 1910, but ultimately lost, and so he was forced to hastily rebrand his product under the name pork roll. However, this presented an issue. See, pork roll is a generic term, and he was not permitted to trademark it. And now there was little to distinguish it from any of his many competitors. While Taylor would end up being the Coca-Cola to Case's Pepsi in this particular bout, I'm sure it still wounded the man's pride. So there you go. Taylor is the superior pork roll, but was originally Taylor's ham, and was only forced to change because of an act of tyrannical government overreach. Now that that's settled, we can get to the real debate, the only one worth having. Do you prefer Wawa or Quick Check? That'll about do it for me. If you stuck with me this far, thank you so much for watching. Sources in the description. This has been Words and Coffee. Until next time.